gang, Jim Spellos here, and today, hope you're doing okay by the way, today we're going to talk about pivot tables in Excel. What we want to do is go from very fundamental to much more advanced in a reasonably short amount of time. Now, a lot of the stuff that we all learn about this is when we need to do something. So I'm going to show you some of the coolest tricks I've learned, some of the tools that have enhanced using pivot tables, and get you comfortable with it. So we're going to talk about building it, modifying it, updating it, and then charting it and playing with it in different ways. Pretty straightforward, really cool. I have a basic worksheet. If you want the worksheet that I'm working with today, send me a note. Happy to send it to you. But what I really encourage you to do is just build it yourself. Take a basic table and let's look at right here the table that I have. And it's really important to understand that you do want your data in a table and you want it formatted as such. It's going to help the pivot table as you grow the amount of records in there. For a shorter one, not critical, but you'll understand as you start dealing with bigger and bigger pivot tables and bigger data sets. So basically last year on this list we have dates and months and the amount of revenue that have been brought in, or commission actually, the last name of the salesperson, the state. Now, we want to analyze this. We want to do so in a way that's going to allow us to figure out as quickly as possible how each salesperson did, or how we did in each state, or what we did month by month. And I know, because you know Excel, you can build over and over and over again really fundamental formulas, but that would take you forever. The beauty of a pivot table is it allows you to take all this data, and with just a couple of clicks, literally a couple of clicks, you're going to be able to start analyzing the stuff that you really want to be doing in Excel. So again, we have the basic table set. I'm going to scroll down. It's about 120, 119 rows down. And to create the pivot table, I don't need to highlight everything, because if you do basic fundamental setup in Excel, which is your data has no blank rows, no blank columns, all we need to do to start this process is click anywhere inside the data, go to the insert menu at the top of the screen, and toward the far left find pivot table. Now, one thing to note, I'm working on Office 365. If you have older versions of stuff, it could be in different places. Hopefully you've been morphing to the later versions of Excel, so it's going to be pretty consistent. What will pop up is the Create Pivot Table dialog box. And essentially we're going to let all the defaults ride right now. It's going to put a table in there that's based on cells A2 through E119, and we're going to put it into a new worksheet. So nothing else said, click OK, got to hit the button, and nothing. Well, sort of nothing. We have on the left side the basic formatting that's going to create the pivot table. The right side, really important, which fields we want. So let's just make a couple of very quick decisions. I want across the top the month to be there. So I'm going to click on where it says month on the right side. You might see me moving this down to the columns box. When I select it, it goes there. By the way, if I didn't want it there, I could just pick it up and move it to the rows box. That's how straightforward it is. In fact, we can keep this really simple right now. We can just do an analysis by month. We can say we want to know the rows, or we want to know the months. You know the row right there anyway. And you want to know the total dollar value, which is a field. But as we go back to that original data, it's just individual by individual. We want to collectively, what did we do in January? So we're going to click on total dollar value and just hop that into values, and watch what happens when I release the mouse. 3, 2, 1. There it is. Simple. Basic information there. Now, it's not all you need to do, and I know you can do shortcuts to be able to work this, but let's start bringing this a little bit differently organized. For example, what if we wanted, as we did initially, to move the month over to the columns? So we can just drag where it has month. I'm on the bottom right side of the screen if you didn't see that little Zippo thing come in there, and I'm just going to drag it into columns. Okay, and now for that rows area, I'm just going to take the state data, bring it down there, and release 3, 2, 1. There you go. Pretty cool. Right there we have basic information that's here. We're going to leave it here for a second because there's so much to look at right here. For example, the columns and the rows do have filters in here. And by the way, anytime in Excel or shoot anywhere online, you see a drop down, you should only do one thing, and that's click it. Unless it's a bad link, that's another story. But click those drop downs because there are all sorts of customization tools available. And we can dig deeper and deeper, but let's do something pretty straightforward. Maybe we only want the first quarter. Well, we can go into this drop down and unselect all and choose January, February, and March. And there you go. And by the way, because we could do that for column labels, could we do it for row labels? Maybe we didn't want all the states. Maybe we just wanted DC, Georgia, and Florida. Okay. That's all it is. That's all a pivot table is in a functional approach. It takes a large set of data and it allows you to slice and dice it. And remember that word slice because we're going to be getting to that in a bit, to be able to analyze it quickly without having to build formulas. So now that we've done a little bit of work here, let's undo what we just did. We're going to go back to those filters. We're going to select all, both on the row labels and the column labels. One of the great things about pivot tables that I really like a lot is to be able to continually add to it. I've built this table, but maybe what I really want to see is the states by salesperson. And if we look in our pivot table fields over to the right, we're going to see we do have last name here. But one thing I want to show you before we do that, ever work on a pivot table and all of a sudden that right side menu disappears like that? When you click outside of a pivot table, you're going to lose that right side menu. So what you need to always realize is don't panic. Click inside the pivot table and look to the top of your menu screen. Because if it doesn't pop up automatically, you will have an option that's pivot table. Now it's pivot table analyze. In fact, there are two unique pivot table menus, analyze and design, even though I probably spend about 99% of my time in the pivot table analyze menu. And when you look to the far right under the show grouping field list, if I clicked on that right now, I can actually lose that if I needed more space to play with stuff. What stuff? Well, we'll get to that. Click it again, it's back in here. There's so many other things we can do, but we're going to try to keep this focused on the coolest and the most useful tools out there. We said we wanted last name in there to be by last name, by state. Now I'm going to make a mistake here, which is the way I usually do business. And I'm going to click on last name. I'm going to drag it down, but I'm going to put it below state. And when I release, 3, 2, 1, boom. That's really ugly because that's every single state and the salesperson, the state, and that's not what I want. All I have is the data mixed up right there. I want the salesperson to be on top. So I'm going to go back down to rows on the bottom right. I'm going to find state. I'm going to drag it below last name. And nice and neat, look what happens right there. Pretty cool, right? We've gotten a lot of stuff right here that we're able to do. Now we're able to take this. We can take it by particular state. We can take it by month. We can put it in by quarter if we wanted to. There's a lot of different tools that we have here. Now, if I right-click on those months, another set of menus comes up, and these menus are pretty cool as well. Menus that include grouping. Let's say everything was based on a particular date as opposed to months at a time, and I wanted to group that into weeks. You can all do that through there. I could click on group. Now it's not going to allow me because these are months already, but I'm going to quickly scoot over to another worksheet, something I do with Rock and Wrap It Up. And when we're talking about some of the pickups we're doing for food recovery, I can click in that right click area, go to group, and now I have it set up by dates, but in dates in groups of 7, which would be weeks. I don't know why they don't have weeks in there, but I can just take that and I can go, no, all I want this to be in is quarters. Well, I click and I get it. I go back to group. I go, nah, let me get it in dates, but maybe I want it in groups of 10 dates. Get the idea, right? You can do whatever you want from within here. Now, you're never altering the data, which is a beautiful thing. Let's get back to the other one for a second because we've been playing it here. Now, here's something to note. If I go back into my data And the very bottom, I realized I forgot to add something. I forgot to add December and 12/28, 2019 in New York, and it's brown, and it's $99.99, and that's all cool. The problem with a pivot table, as opposed to calculations, is pivot tables tend not to automatically refresh. Think about it. If you have a large set of data and all of these calculations that are taking place, your system's just going to drag down to a crawl in order to do that. So anytime you add data, even if you have it in a table, what I want you to always realize is when you go back to your pivot table sheet and you go to Analyze, right in the middle of that menu, there's a refresh button. Just click it. And now it's going to refresh. Now, right next to there's an important button, Change Data Source. Because when I click on that, it's now showing me why the table is important, because this is not set as a table. It's only set to 119. Why does that matter? Well, let's go back over here, not to row 10,000. That's not really going to help us too much out here. But if we go down to row 120, that is where we added the information. So what I'm going to do, sort of backing up this process, is I'm going to highlight everything from E120 up to A2, and I'm going to create a table out of this. I mean, pretty straightforward that if I wanted to, I can take any data I have and put it into a table as opposed to putting it into just any type of random information. So I click Insert, left side of the screen, there are my tables. I'm going to click one. It now gives me the data up to 120. That's fine. I'm not going to worry about formatting right now. But what we're going to see here is at this point, when we go back to the pivot table, go back to that menu, go back to the data source and change it. Now what we want to do is change this so that it's actually going to the proper table. So we're going to go over to current year purchases, and we're going to highlight everything up to 120. This now is going to get it. I know I can go shorter than that, but I started this up, so I'm going that way. And notice it says it's table 1. Now when I select this and click OK, that's going to help the updating process. But still, always remember, if you're doing stuff in pivot tables, go to Analyze, refresh. Even a good, properly formatted table sometimes isn't going to update. Okay, so we've done stuff here. We've talked about some filters. We've talked about grouping some information that's right here. There's lots of stuff that we could do. One thing people don't realize within a pivot table that you could do is you can add your own fields. You can take your data and add it the way you want. Maybe we wanted to weight some of this data. You know, maybe some of the information we wanted to multiply by 1.2 rather than by 1. Well, what we could do is we could create a calculated field. Let me show you how to do that. It's pretty straightforward. We're in the pivot table. We're in the pivot table Analyze menu. We're going to go over to the calculations grouping, and we're going to find where it says fields, items, and sets. Clicking down, the top option is calculated field. So now what I want to do is I want this field to be named. We're going to call this test field, no spaces please in here, and the formula, and we're going to add this, but before we do, we got to give it a formula. So why don't we say this is total value times 1.2. Okay, that's all we've done. I can insert that again and again if I want to do multiple calculations, which you don't. So easy enough. Total value times 1.2. We're going to add this, and now as we see on the right side, test field is now an option, and now it's giving us both the information for the basic dollars and for the calculated field. Now we don't want that for right here, so we're going to go over to the right side. It says sum of test field. Just pull that back up into the basic area. We've gotten rid of it, but that's how easy it is to create a calculated field. So if you needed to do any sort of formatting, why would that work? Well, again, I'm going to go back to the use that we have within Rock and Wrap It Up, when we actually recover both pounds of food and pans of food. And we need to add both together, but the pounds are pounds, but the pans we need to multiply by a standard multiplier, which would be 10 pounds per pan. And that way I don't have to do multiple calculations. I can just add these two up, total pounds and total number of trays. We have a calculated field, sum of the pans and pounds, and I can go in there, I can change it, I can do all sorts of things. But again, if you need to create a calculated field, very straightforward. Cool. Now we have this stuff here. Let's go to chart making, because pivot tables have a beautiful relationship with charts. Now we're going to start by creating a chart that's a bit busy, and I'm okay with that because we're going to play with it straightforward. So we have our data selected. I've gotten rid of that side menu just so we have a little more space. I told you we had to work on that a little bit. And then at the top right of your pivot table analyze menu, in the tools section, it's pivot chart. Click it. Lots of options. You're going to see this is busy, but hang tight because we're going to be able to play with this really well. We want a column chart here. Great. Click OK. And there's the chart. By the way, if you are a frequent taker of some of my classes where we talk about that F11 tool for quick chart making, works here too, by the way. But this is way too busy for us. Although it got us a chart here in 5 seconds. But now we start using some of the filters. And if you look at the bottom left of the chart, the filters are built into this chart. So last name, I only want to compare Aaron and Brown. So I unselect all, so nothing is checked, and then check both of those. I click. There it is. I'm going to get rid of this style thing. I don't want it here. It'll go away in a second. And then what I'm going to do here is go to state, and I'm only going to select California, Colorado, and Iowa. You don't hear those 3 states mentioned in the same sentence often. And nothing's going to happen there. Didn't get anything in there. That's okay. Maybe what I want to do is I want to go a little bit deeper with a couple of other states and see what happens. And now you're building all of these charts. The style area here, you have options to be able to change it any way you want just by hovering over that. So you have all sorts of options coming up. Just by clicking in the chart, you get rid of that. I want to do a little bit more here, so I can go to state again. I'm going to choose all the states, and that way this time I'm just going to look at, well, maybe just Zippy, one of our top salespeople. Click OK, and now we can see how Zippy did. Not too bad. Easy enough. We haven't spent time designing the chart. We just put it in there, and we spent time pulling information into the chart. Now, I want to show you something else. What you might want with a chart is something more linear, where perhaps your X, your bottom axes, are the months. So, again, easy to take this stuff and modify it. Click in the pivot table. Go up to the pivot table, analyze, and let's bring that field list back. Remember, it's on the far right of that menu in the show grouping. And now what we're going to do is we're going to take, let's see what we're going to do. We're going to get rid of last name, and you'll see why in a second. We're going to move state here and columns in the months here. Okay, so now we have it January to December. And now what we might want to do is also bring in the last name of the person beneath the state. And we have that information. And now look at that. We have over on the right side of that chart. Didn't have to get rid of the chart, just kept it right on the screen. We can go, okay, I only want maybe Zippy and Evan. And we have that there. We can choose the state. You get the idea. I don't need to go through all these examples. Once you have that chart built within a pivot table, look for those drop-down filters. Those filters are going to be absolutely brilliant for you to be able to customize what you need. So we've talked about basic design of the chart. Really quick. Get your data properly set up. Set it in a table. Build it. We now know that we can go into the pivot table itself, and I'm going to get rid of this chart just by clicking it. And don't worry about that. All that shading thing means the chart is still there. It's just not set up in a way right now to be visible. We know we can go to the filters. We can make changes to the filters in anything we have in columns or in rows. All cool. We know with certain types of data, especially when it's dates, we can regroup the data by right-clicking. And by the way, right-clicking is a huge benefit. For example, we can do sorting here. We can filter. We can do a top 10 list. That's right here. There's so much that we could pull out of here. But what we want to do for the last few minutes of this particular training is we want to get into a couple of things that about 5 or 6 years ago Excel showed and put into the software that was specifically designed for pivot tables. And they are two tools that I use on a regular basis. They are called slicers and timelines. So I've gone to another workbook. Same data that's here. But this time I'm going to go to a particular tab that says PT Slicers. Now right now, nothing new. We have it set up, last name in columns, months in the rows, sum of total sales in the middle. Nothing doing that's different. However, click inside, go to the pivot table, analyze, and on the filter grouping, click on insert slicer. And now we got options. Now, which one do we want? Let's just go with one of them. Let's go with the option of last name. Click on it, click OK. Now, what does that mean? We have last name here. But if I click on Aaron's name right here, I'm just going to get Aaron for those months. If I'm going to click on Brown's name, I can quickly get a report based on Brown. If I want to compare two people and sort of combine them, I can click and then control click, for example, on Charles. Control click will now show me Brown and Charles and their total. Or I can click on one of them, I can move down to Evans, and I can shift click. And shift click always says select the range in between and including your start and end points. And now I have Brown, Charles, Dean, and Evans here. Slicers, allowing us to slice the data perhaps and hopefully even more simply. By the way, you can have more than one slicer available at a time. So I'm going to go back to the data within the pivot table. I'm going to go back to pivot table, analyze. You see we keep going back there. We're going to go back to insert slicer. And now on top of the last name, let's do a state slicer because we don't have the state data in here at all. And click OK. And now that state data, we can, let's make a little setup and format a little easier. I'm just going to click on, for example, Alabama. Maybe I'll add Florida by control clicking. Maybe I'll add Illinois by control clicking on that. And you see now, with just a basic pivot table done, the slicer allows us to get these reports done exactly as we want them. Pretty darn cool in and of itself. We're going to use that to do one more thing in a few minutes, but when Excel released slicers, they also released another function. I'm not as big a fan of it, but I want to show it to you. It's called timeline. And in fact, in this workbook, the PT timeline, I have it already set up. So what I'll do is get rid of it so you can see how it works. So we have here basic setup. We have all the months on one side, and we have both Brown and Charles selected for the people that we want to analyze. Pivot table analyze, getting boring, right? Insert timeline. Let's insert a date timeline to this, and this gives us a chronological linear approach. Right now it's in quarters, but if we look on the right side, let's make this bigger so you can see a little easier. On the top right, where it says quarters, it's a drop down. You know what to do. You see a drop down and that's right, you click it. Years, months, days. Let's go to months. And let's just look at March. So I'm just going to click right in the blue box where it says March. And now we have March. Now because it's a linear process, if I wanted the first quarter, I could choose quarters, but I could just drag that slider and move it as far over as I want. Slicers, timelines, both really useful, nifty ways to slice and dice information. One last thing to talk about is as we're doing these, we might want to get a snapshot of these. And what people oftentimes do to really get the reports to stand out in Excel is to create a dashboard. I'm going to go to, on the far right of my worksheets at the bottom, PT Dashboard, to show you that what I've done here is I've put some of the tools in here and allow us now to build everything based on the data. Now I haven't put anything in there yet, but the basic dashboard is nothing more than taking those tools, for example, in the timeline, taking date, copying it, going to dashboard, pasting it, and moving it around. It's still going to be tied to the report that we have. And once I start building the report more fully, I didn't do this right now, but once I do that, everything is accessible. A dashboard is nothing more than being able to take the data and all the different formatting reports that we have and put it in a single location. So let's review what we talked about today. We looked at the creation of a pivot table. We understood that we have a lot of options, but to set the pivot table up properly with tables is going to help us tremendously. We then took a look at, once we built this, how we can build the fields and how we can choose what goes into any particular report. All cool. We noticed that the drop-down menus that are here give us additional options in terms of us being able to filter out data. We know that from the data that we have and using the pivot table analyze menu, by going to pivot chart, we can easily create any type of chart that we want with a single click. And yes, you were right, the person in the back row who's watching this right now, you can put that into the dashboard. Pretty darn cool that you now can take this data and make incredibly powerful analysis here. And then we talked about some of the newer tools, not the newest tools. We actually had covered a video a while ago about some of the really new Excel tools, but the slicers and timelines option, which they now give you. And as I said, more of a fan of the slicers to be able to just get a quick pivot table in there and take the different fields and slice and dice them to your heart's content. And if you like a snapshot of it, take a picture of it, put it in your dashboard, and boy, you are an Excel pivot table rock star right now. Hope you enjoyed. If you have any questions, this is on our Patreon site, so always just reach out to me. Really appreciate you being here. Let me know any other ideas that you have for webinars, whatever we're going to call this. It really isn't a webinar, right? But I also want you to know that we are working on a digital privacy one, should be out in the next week or so. So look for it here. Be well, gang. Stay safe. Thanks. Bye.